before we can get started on the installation, we have to remove certain components to make sure they don't get damaged during the installation process. The first thing you want to do is, if you've actually screwed any fittings into this thing, you definitely want to remove them because if you scratch the surface of the quick connects or the JIC, it'll cause a leak. So remove those. You'll also want to remove the intermediate pump harness, which connects the hanger to the double pump hot wire harness. And the way you do that is you make sure this red lock is pulled out. You can see it slides back and forth. It's pulled out. You press down on the latch on the back side and slide it out. You'll also want to make careful note of the position of the pumps and the level sensor and the way it's rotated on the shaft relative to the discharge ports. It must be aligned in this fashion, and the hoses must be routed in these locations to prevent interference with the level sensor in the tank and also to make it easier to install. Before we get started with the disassembly of the hanger, we want to give a brief explanation as to why the positioning has to be the way it is. This is a factory tank with the plastic baffling. In Racetronic's opinion, it is still the best tank on the market for this application. The other choice would be a Spectra 2nd generation, which has the updated baffling, and there's a couple other brands on the market that may be considered as well. But if you have a factory tank and it can be salvaged, it's your best option. The position of the level sensor has to be towards the front of the car, and the pumps have to be at the back side to side, from left to right, like this, so that it doesn't interfere or hang up on the baffling in the tank. And if you want to take a quick peek inside the factory tank, for you that have not seen it before, you can see that towards the front of the tank there is a lot of real estate for the level sensor to go up and down unimpeded. And then just below the hole in the tank, there is enough width for the filter socks and the pumps. And don't forget, under hard acceleration, all that fuel is going to go to the back of the baffling, and that's where you want the pickup socks, the filter socks, to be for the fuel pumps. We're going to walk through the disassembly of the double pump hanger so that it can be installed in the tank in stages. But before we do that, we just want to make note of a couple things. First off, when Racetronics assembles and tests these, we set the height of the pump in the brackets so that they sit perfectly on the bottom of the factory tank. There should be no reason other than to replace a pump, or if you have a non-standard tank that's not allowing the pumps to fully seat, to adjust the height in these brackets. So in other words, do not remove or loosen the T screws on this side or this side of pump 1 or 2 unless 100% required. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to disassemble and disconnect the fuel lines, the electrical, and the staged pump brackets. To remove the in-tank electrical connector from the bulkhead connector, you must press down on the latch on this connector while at the same time providing a subtle degree of force to actually get it to slide out from the socket. So I'm pushing down with the screwdriver, small flat blade screwdriver, which pushes down on the lock, and I'm gently prying it away in that location. You can see it just slid out from the bulkhead connector, and then we're just going to sort of gently push that off to the side. The next thing we have to do is to loosen the extended crescent lock that's around the mounting / return shaft on the hanger. And we use a 5/8 wrench and put that around the crescent lock to loosen it. and it will unscrew. You might want to also put some masking tape around here if you want to prevent scuffing. That's up to you. And then once the crescent lock is out, you can see that there's a cutout in the side that allows you to slide it on and off the shaft easily. Gently rotate the head back and forth, and the shaft will slide out of the head. And you can see inside the head there are two O-rings that provide a seal for the return fuel going back to the tank. It's very important that on any of these sealing surfaces that you do not scratch anything, because if you do, it'll cause leaks. And this is the area of the shaft that would be very sensitive to getting scratched. Also, you don't want to get any debris inside there on the O-rings, because again, it'll leak. The next thing you want to do is you want to remove the crescent locks from the quick disconnect fittings for the fuel tubes for the pumps. And again, these use a 5/8 wrench. There is a hex on top of the crescent locks, and you simply put them on there and rotate them in this direction until they're loose, and then you can unscrew them by hand. And you can see that they also have a relief cut in the side, and they will slide on and off the fittings. And again, you just want to gently pull those out. Same thing with this one. Remove the crescent lock. And remove the quick disconnect fitting. And these also use double O-ring seals that go into the discharge port for maximum flow. To prevent damage to the level sensor while we're working on this, it's probably a good idea to actually remove the arm. And it very simply clips in over here. And what you can do is you can take, again, a small flat blade screwdriver and insert it from the side underneath the arm. Okay, be careful not to break the plastic clips. And it has to be in this position so the shaft can come out. You cannot remove the shaft if it's up in the up or down position, because the metal doesn't have the relief here. That's it. The next part you want to remove is the screw holding the level sensor bracket onto the dowel pins. So we use a 3mm Allen head wrench. And the level sensor bracket will just simply slide right off. You can see there's a locating dowel there, which helps reassemble it in the tank for locating purposes. And the area where the bracket sits is also keyed. And finally, the last stage here is you want to loosen the return mounting shaft, which will allow you to separate the two pumps for assembly inside the tank. And for that, we need a 3/8 wrench, open-end wrench. You rotate it in this direction here, and you can see it'll unthread from the brackets like so, and you remove the shaft by sliding it down like that. And now you have two separate pumps and a bracket that you will install in the tank in sequence, and then reassemble everything in the opposite order that we dismantled it. Okay, before you get started inserting the pumps into the tank and assembling everything, we recommend that you put some sort of tape on the sharp edge of the opening of the tank to prevent you from cutting into the wires or the tubes during assembly. And then once everything's dropped in the tank, you can just simply peel it off. So the first thing we want to do is going to take a little bit of practice, a little bit of a puzzle, and there is limited space, is we got to drop pump number 1, it says on the bracket pump number 1, into the tank onto the return shaft. So we'll put this through here, like so. Remember that the marking pump 1's got to face towards the front of the tank or the front of the car. And we'll put that in through the hole. Be careful not to tear this filter sock or pull it off. Okay, and then we'll drop that down inside the tank. And once it's past the opening, that provides a little more clearance so that the second pump can be dropped down in the tank as well. So what we're going to do here now is we're going to take the second pump and get it past the opening. Okay, and you're going to have to play with this a little bit. It probably won't be the first time. And then get that pump slipped over the shaft as well. And you'll know you have the pumps in the right position because the marking pump 1 and pump 2 will be facing towards the front of the tank, and you'll also see the dowels start to line up. I don't know if you can see that there in the video. I'll try to move this out of the way for you here. See all that stuff going on there? And then what you do is you can lift this pump on top of the other bracket there, and you'll see those 2 locating dowels lock into place. And then what I can do is I can start to rotate the shaft. Just got to get the right direction here. Don't drop the shaft in the tank. Okay. You can feel it tightening up. You want to rotate the shaft this direction here. So from the top side, it looks like it's counterclockwise. Okay. Now once you have that done, you'll notice that there is a hex on the shaft here, and that's so you can put a wrench on it. This takes a little bit of practice. You can grab this whole assembly here. Sorry, I was going the wrong way. And you rotate it in this direction. You can hold the tops of the pumps. I'm holding them with my fingers here. Remember, you know, this tape is definitely helping us here so we don't scuff these wires. You don't want any shorts. We just give it a good nudge there. Okay. And that's allowing the 2 brackets to stay together. Look at that. Isn't that amazing, guys? Now the next thing you want to do, this sometimes takes a bit of playing around with as well. Just give me 1 second here. The next thing you want to do is put the level sensor arm back on the level sensor. This was the float. And you can see it slides in like so, and it just locks in place. That's it. Make sure when you're working with these wires here, they are fairly small and delicate, so you don't want to keep bending them back and forth too many times because you could break them off, and then you're going to have to repair that. As you can see, the level sensor bracket has special keying, and it also has a dowel locator pin on the pump brackets, if you remember when you took this thing apart. And before you even drop this in the tank, one thing I will mention to you is the screw that we use to secure this is stainless steel, and it does not have magnetic properties. So what I've found is that if you put a piece of tape on top of the tip of the 3 millimeter hex wrench or Allen wrench, it'll go a long way to actually holding it in place until you have it screwed in, so you don't end up dropping it in the tank and having to fish it out. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the fuel tubes or the bracket here. I find holding the tubes keeps them out of the way actually. And we can actually take the level sensor and drop it into the tank. I don't know if the camera can pick this up yet or not. And you will see, sorry, just bear with me a second here. You will see the level sensor bracket, and you can raise it up a bit if you have to. play with it a little bit. Just get it in place. Some people prefer to put the arm on afterwards. That's an option as well, but then you'll need some long nose. Okay, as you can see, I have the level sensor bracket on the first dowel pin there, and all you have to do is rotate the bracket in place. You can see a little bit better there on the video. Over here, the screw hole, make sure it's lined up. Put the screw in the hole. You don't want to strip anything. Okay, so we have the bracket located in the dowel pin. You just want to make sure that the first few threads on the screw feel like they're going in properly. You don't want to cross thread anything, and just tighten it up. It always helps to have a second set of hands if you got a buddy that can help you out, hold the wires and the tubes out of the way or something like that. In any event, I'm just going to grab this here by the shaft so I can get a little bit more torque on that. You can see you don't have to tighten it too much. And now, look at that, guys. We have two pumps in the tank. We have the level sensor up near the front, and you can see the float arm sort of over there in the front, free and clear of all the baffling. And now we're going to put the head back on the assembly. Okay, the next step is to make sure you put the gasket on. This area should be free and clear of all dirt. And also, of course, while you're working on this, make sure you don't scuff and make holes in these nylon hoses or the wires. Always be careful of that. We'll take the tank gasket and put it in place. Some of them have a wire spine in them with these locator tabs. A lot of them now just are a basic O-ring that sits in this pocket around the... One thing we should remind you is not to forget to take the tape off that you were using to protect around the tank opening before you put the gasket back on. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to take the head of the hanger and put it on the return shaft, and once you've done that, it makes it a lot easier to hold everything in place without having to have a second person, and then you can plug in the electrical and the fuel tubes. So this cavity here is for the return port, and that's where the shaft goes into. And make sure the surface is clean, you haven't scratched it, and you don't get any dirt in the O-rings. And we're just going to go like that. It slips on very easy. Okay, and then we're going to take this a crescent lock, the extended one, and slide it over the shaft. And you don't want to drop this. Okay, so once you get its thread started by hand, you can just snug it up ever so slightly. And now you have a way to hold on to the hanger and deal with the other aspects of the installation. The next thing I recommend you do is you take the electrical connector and you plug it into the bulkhead. You can see the lock is facing this way, which is away from here. And we go like this, and you hear it go click, and it locks in place. So after you have the electrical connector plugged into the bulkhead, we're going to plug in the fittings for pump 1 and pump 2 to the head. And what we'll first do here is we're going to loop it around this way, and there's a port underneath that's on the front. Always make sure that you haven't scratched this or any dirt on anything, because you definitely don't want to compromise the seal. And you just wiggle it around there on the first port, and it just slides right in. And then we can do the same thing on the other side, like so. You won't have to, persuade these tubes to sort of loop down and around like the way they were outside the tank, sort of relaxed. And that's why we're not tightening these up right away, because we want these to be able to swivel. Okay, so those are both in now. What we're going to do is take these crescent locks and put them in place. Remember, don't drop these in the tank. So We're fishing them out again. All right, you just slip it around there. It might take a little bit of doing to get them locked or started, the thread started. Just have patience. And then we're going to put the second one on for pump number 2. Great. Now you can see that the fuel tubes are sort of like in a position that they sort of feel comfortable and relaxed in. They sort of loop nicely down and around. And what we're going to do now is we're going to tighten these crescent locks, and you don't have to use a lot of force. Remember, the O-ring on the shaft is what makes it seal. This just holds it in place. We got our 5/8 wrench. You put it on the hex portion of the crescent lock. Make sure it's properly engaged. Take your time. You have to find the right spot sometimes, especially if it's not a thin wall wrench. You might not want to, find the sweet spot. But once you do, just give it a little nudge. Don't reef on it too much. Okay, we're going to do pump number 2 now. We're on the crescent lock, and you can see I'm just giving it ever so slightly. Get on that hex there so it seats nicely. You don't want to strip all this stuff up and make it all nasty. Okay, just give it a nudge. Now it's locked in place. Now the last thing you want to do is you want to tighten the crescent lock that's for the shaft that holds the pump in the tank. And the reason why we left that to last is because you want to make sure that the pumps are side to side in the tank, the level sensors all the way forward, and the discharge ports line up with the relief in the tank. And I think we're pretty good, so you're going to need some light to double check this. But I'm looking at the situation here right now, and I think we rotated it a little bit, so we're just going to play with it a little bit there. Okay, just going to double check the alignment, make sure everything's good. And then once you're satisfied, you can grab the 5/8 wrench again, put it around the crescent lock for the shaft here, and rotate it in this direction. Just give it a good nudge, like that. Not too much, it's aluminum. And just double check that nothing's moved. Now that we have the hanger installed and we replaced the lock ring, you'll notice that the locator tabs for the aluminum head should be in these channels here. You can see one here and one here. They should not be rotated elsewhere because that'll misalign everything inside the tank. The next thing we're going to do is put the fittings back in. Now, depending on the type of lines you have in your car, you can have a various adapter fittings to screw into this head. Most customers would probably have the Racetronics B3 line kits, and as I explained before, those are going to use 3/8 and 5/16 quick connect adapters. The vent is always going to be a -4 ORB to -4 JIC, and we will supply a push lock -4 JIC female fitting to put on. Other people may have our old B2 line kits before we went to the quick connect type, and in that case you'll want to be using ORB to male JIC adapters. This one here is a -10. We're not going to be using that for purpose of this discussion because that's going to be for an upcoming line upgrade. Most customers with the B2 line kits will be using -10 ORB to -8 JIC adapter for the feed, and a -6 ORB to -6 JIC male for the return. This is a little bit smaller than port, however this is still way more flow than anybody would need for horsepowers well exceeding 1400. When installing the fittings, it's a lot easier if you start with the largest fitting and tighten it and work your way to the smallest fitting. Don't over tighten these. They rely on O-rings to seal, so just make them snug. You don't want to be stripping anything. If you want to keep your fittings looking nice and pretty, we recommend a set of aluminum fitting wrenches. They prevent scuffing of the aluminum fittings.